She stood at the top of the marble staircase, champagne glass in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through her newest Instagram post. A photo of herself draped in diamonds worth more than most people's homes. Below her, the mansion pulsed with music, laughter, and the kind of reckless energy that money could buy but never sustain. Dorcas Loran was 24 years old, beautiful, and filthy rich. And she believed, with every fiber of her being, that the world owed her everything. Down the hall, in a room she rarely visited anymore, her mother sat alone in a wheelchair, staring out the window at the sprawling estate that used to feel like home. Rose Loran was 65, her body weakened by illness, her heart heavy with a weight no medicine could cure. She had spent 30 years standing beside a man who built an empire from nothing, sacrificing her own dreams, her own health, so that one day their daughter could inherit a life of comfort. But comfort, Rose had learned, was not the same as wisdom. And wealth, without character, was just another kind of poverty. Dorcas didn't see it that way. To her, the money was hers. The mansion was hers. The cars, the clothes, the freedom to do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, it was all hers. And anyone who tried to tell her otherwise, including her own mother, was just jealous, bitter, or too old to understand what it meant to truly live. The music downstairs grew louder. Dorcas descended the staircase like a queen entering her court, her designer heels clicking against the marble, her silk dress flowing behind her. The crowd parted for her, faces she barely recognized calling her name, raising their glasses, pretending they cared about anything other than the free drinks and the bragging rights of being at a Dorcas Loran party. She smiled, posed for more photos, and felt the familiar rush of attention wash over her. This was power. This was freedom. This was what her mother would never understand. In her room, Rose heard the music vibrating through the walls. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the little girl Dorcas used to be. The one who would climb into her lap after a nightmare, who would ask her mother to braid her hair before school, who would sit at the kitchen table and talk about her dreams of becoming a doctor, a teacher, someone who helped people. That little girl had disappeared somewhere along the way, buried under layers of designer labels and empty validation. Rose had tried. God knows she had tried. Every conversation, every gentle warning, every attempt to reach her daughter had been met with venom. The first time Dorcas called her a witch, Rose had been standing in the doorway of Dorcas' bedroom, watching her daughter pack for another weekend trip to Dubai with people she'd just met online. Rose had said nothing cruel, nothing harsh. She had simply asked, "Do you ever think about slowing down? About finding something that means more than just spending?" Dorcas had spun around, eyes cold, voice sharp as broken glass. "You sound like a witch, you know that? You just sit in that chair all day, miserable, trying to drag me down with you. I'm young. I'm alive. And I'm not going to waste my life the way you wasted yours." The words had hit Rose like a physical blow. She had wheeled herself out of the room, closed the door, and wept in silence, wondering how the daughter she had poured her life into could speak to her with such cruelty. But that was only the beginning. Over the months that followed, the insults became more frequent, more calculated, more designed to wound. Whenever Rose tried to speak, to advise, to warn her daughter about the people she was surrounding herself with, Dorcas would lash out. She called her mother an enemy of progress, a burden, a jealous old woman who couldn't stand to see her daughter happy. She told her, more than once, that she should be grateful Dorcas even allowed her to live in the house. The house that Rose and her late husband had built together, brick by brick, dream by dream. The house where they had raised Dorcas, where they had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where they had held each other during the hard years when money was tight and hope was all they had. The house that now felt like a mausoleum of broken promises. Dorcas' father, Marcus Loran, had died 2 years earlier from a sudden heart attack. He had been 58 years old, standing at the peak of his success, with a business empire that stretched across 3 continents. He had started with nothing, the son of immigrants, working construction jobs during the day and taking business classes at night, building connections, taking risks, refusing to quit even when everyone told him he would fail. Rose had been there for all of it. She had worked 2 jobs to support them while Marcus built his first company. She had gone without so he could invest. She had believed in him when no one else did. When Marcus finally made it, When the money started flowing in and the opportunities multiplied, he had turned to Rose and said, "Everything I have is because of you. Everything we build is for our family." He had meant it, every word. And when he died, he left everything to Dorcas, trusting that his daughter would honor his legacy, take care of her mother, and use the wealth wisely. But trust, like respect, is a fragile thing. And Dorcas had shattered both without a second thought. Her life became a blur of excess that would have broken her father's heart. Private jets to islands whose names she couldn't remember. Designer bags she wore once and forgot. Cars she bought on impulse and never drove. Men who smiled at her beauty and whispered sweet lies while emptying her bank accounts and laughing about it with their friends. Friends who called her queen to her face and fool behind her back, who showed up for the parties and disappeared when she needed them. She threw parties that lasted for days, filled the mansion with strangers who treated her father's home like a playground, broke his antiques, stained his carpets, and disrespected everything he had worked for. And when her mother dared to ask her to turn down the music, to show some respect for the neighbors, to remember that this house had history, Dorcas would scream at her to stay in her room and stop ruining everything. Rose stopped asking. She stopped speaking. She sat in her wheelchair, watching her daughter destroy herself piece by piece, and wondered where she had gone wrong. Had she loved too much? Had she protected too much? Had she failed to teach Dorcas the difference between having money and having worth? The questions haunted her through sleepless nights while the parties raged below. Then came the night Dorcas made her decision. It was 3 a.m, mid-December, and the party had finally died down. Dorcas stood in the wreckage of the living room, surrounded by empty bottles, broken glass, and people she didn't even recognize passed out on her father's leather couches. Someone had burned a hole in the Persian rug her father had brought back from Tehran. Someone else had thrown up on the Steinway piano her mother used to play. The Christmas tree Rose had carefully decorated was knocked over, ornaments shattered across the floor. Dorcas felt nothing. No joy. No satisfaction. Just a dull, gnawing emptiness that no amount of money could fill, no amount of attention could satisfy. She looked around at the destruction and felt the stirring of something she didn't want to name. Something that felt like regret. And then she heard it. The soft creak of wheels on hardwood. Her mother, coming down the hall. Rose appeared in the doorway, frail and tired, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dorcas, please. This has to stop. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting everyone around you. Your father built this life for you, but he wouldn't recognize what you've become. I'm begging you, come back to who you used to be." Dorcas stared at her mother, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. Not into clarity, not into regret, into something darker, into resentment, into rage. Because standing there in her wheelchair, weak and sick and helpless, her mother still had the power to make her feel small, still had the power to make her feel wrong. "You know what?" Dorcas said, her voice ice cold, each word deliberate. "I'm done with this. I'm done with you sitting there, judging me, making me feel guilty for living my life. You're the problem, not me. You and your sickness and your wheelchair and your constant nagging. I can't be free with you here. I can't breathe with you watching everything I do." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Dorcas, I'm your mother. I only want what's best for you. You want me to be miserable like you." Dorcas spat. "You want me to sit around mourning Dad forever, being boring and safe and dead inside. Well, I'm not you. I'm not going to waste my life being small and scared. Your father wasn't small. I'm not small. We built this life through sacrifice." "I don't care," Dorcas shouted, her voice echoing through the empty mansion. "I don't care about your sacrifices. I don't care about Dad's legacy. This is my life now. My money. My house. And I'm tired of pretending you have any say in how I live it." The silence that followed was devastating. Rose looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. A beautiful, lost, angry stranger who had forgotten where she came from and who had loved her into existence. "If that's how you feel," Rose said quietly, her voice shaking, "then I'll leave." "Good," Dorcas said, turning away. "Maybe you should." But Rose didn't mean leave voluntarily. She meant she would go if Dorcas made her. Because Rose, in her wheelchair, with her illness, had nowhere else to go. No other family. No savings of her own because she had given everything to support Marcus's dream. She was completely dependent on her daughter. And Dorcas knew it. 2 days later, Dorcas made the arrangements. She told herself she was doing it for both of them. That her mother needed professional care, specialized attention, things Dorcas couldn't provide. She found a luxury nursing home an hour outside the city, the kind with marble lobbies and gourmet meals and private rooms with garden views. She told herself it was generous, that most people couldn't afford a place like this, that her mother should be grateful. She didn't tell herself the truth, that she was discarding the woman who had given her everything because she was inconvenient, because she was a reminder, because her presence made it harder for Dorcas to pretend her life was working. The morning they came to take Rose away, Dorcas didn't even say goodbye. She stood in the foyer, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy outside, watching as two attendants helped her mother into the van. They were professional and kind, treating Rose with a gentleness Dorcas hadn't shown her in months. They carefully secured her wheelchair, made sure she was comfortable, asked if she needed anything. Rose looked back once, her hand pressed against the van window, her eyes searching her daughter's face for something. Anything that resembled love or regret. But Dorcas had already turned away, pulled out her phone, and started texting her friends about the party she was planning for that weekend. She had the house to herself now. She was finally completely free. As the van pulled out of the driveway, Rose pressed both hands against the window, tears streaming down her face, watching the only home she had known for 30 years disappear behind her. And Dorcas, inside the mansion, felt nothing but relief and the intoxicating possibility of a life with no limits, no judgment, no one to answer to. She threw the biggest party yet that Saturday night. The nursing home was called Serenity Gardens, which Rose found bitterly ironic. There was nothing serene about being abandoned by your only child. The facility was clean, quiet, and sterile. Rose was given a small room on the second floor with a view of a garden she couldn't walk through. The walls were pale blue. The furniture was functional but impersonal. There was a small television, a bookshelf with donated books, and a window that looked out at carefully manicured lawns where other residents sat in wheelchairs, staring at nothing. For the first few days, Rose sat by that window and cried. She cried for her husband, who had trusted their daughter with everything. She cried for Dorcas, who was so lost she didn't even know it. She cried for herself, for the life she had lived and the ending she was living now. She felt like a burden that had been discarded, like trash left on the curb, and the shame of it consumed her. The other residents were polite but distant, lost in their own worlds of memory and decline. Most of them had families who visited occasionally, children who felt guilty but not guilty enough to actually care. Rose had no one. No visitors. No phone calls. Nothing. And then, one morning, a woman walked into her room. Her name was Julia Foster. She was 32 years old, with warm brown skin, kind eyes, and a smile that reached all the way to her soul. She was a nurse, but not the kind who simply followed a checklist and moved on. Julia sat down in the chair beside Rose's bed, looked at her with genuine interest, and asked, "What's your story?" Rose didn't want to talk. She didn't want to burden anyone with her pain. But Julia didn't leave. She just sat there, patient and present, waiting. And finally, Rose spoke. "I don't have a story anymore," she said quietly. "My story ended when my daughter put me here." Julia tilted her head. "Your story doesn't end until you do. And you're still here. So tell me, who are you?" It was such a simple question. But no one had asked Rose who she was in years. Everyone saw the wheelchair, the illness, the age. No one saw the woman inside. So Rose began to talk. Slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She talked about growing up in Alabama, about meeting Marcus at a church social when she was 19 and he was 21. She talked about their early years, the struggles, the hope, the way they had dreamed together. She talked about watching Marcus build his empire, about being his partner, his support, his foundation. She talked about Dorcas as a little girl, bright and curious and full of promise. And she talked about the heartbreak of watching that little girl grow into a stranger who looked at her with contempt. Julia listened to every word. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix anything. She simply bore witness to Rose's pain. And when Rose finally finished, exhausted and empty, Julia reached over and took her hand. "You are not defined by how someone else chooses to treat you," Julia said quietly. "You are defined by how you choose to rise. And Mrs. Laurent, you're still here. You're still breathing. That means you still have a choice." It was a simple statement. but it planted a seed in Rose's heart that hadn't felt sunlight in a very long time. Julia came back the next day, and the day after that. She wasn't assigned to Rose's wing, but she made time anyway. She brought Rose tea, sat with her during meals, told stories about her own life. Julia had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never quite belonging anywhere. She had put herself through nursing school working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, refusing to quit even when it seemed impossible. She understood what it meant to survive. "You know what I learned?" Julia said one afternoon as they sat together in Rose's room. "I learned that people will disappoint you. Family will disappoint you. But you can't disappoint yourself. You have to wake up every day and decide who you want to be, regardless of what anyone else does." Over the weeks that followed, Julia became more than a nurse. She became a friend, then something deeper, a daughter in spirit if not in blood. She encouraged Rose to attend the facility's therapy sessions, to participate in physical rehabilitation, to rediscover parts of herself she had forgotten existed. She brought Rose art supplies, remembering that Rose had mentioned loving to paint as a young woman. She brought flowers from her own garden. She brought laughter, warmth, and the kind of unconditional acceptance Rose had been starving for. And slowly, impossibly, Rose began to heal. Not just physically, though that happened too. The physical therapy strengthened her legs. The proper medication regulated her condition. The good food and regular sleep restored some of her vitality. But more than that, her spirit began to heal. The sadness that had weighed her down for so long began to lift, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years: hope, purpose, the understanding that her value wasn't determined by whether her daughter recognized it. She started painting again, watercolors of flowers and landscapes and abstract emotions. She joined the book club, made friends with other residents, shared meals and stories. She laughed again, really laughed, the kind that came from her belly and made her eyes water. She discovered that she was still a person, still had thoughts and dreams and things to offer the world. Julia watched it all with pride, encouraging every step, celebrating every victory. And one evening, as they sat together in the garden during Rose's first unsupported walk in over a year, Julia said, "Look at you. You're becoming the woman you were always meant to be." Rose looked down at her legs, shaking but holding her weight, and smiled. "I forgot I could be strong." "You never stopped being strong," Julia corrected gently. "You just needed someone to remind you." Meanwhile, back in the mansion, Dorcas' world was crumbling in ways she couldn't have imagined. It started small, or at least it seemed small at first. A friend named Simone borrowed $20,000 for an emergency and then blocked Dorcas' number. A boyfriend named Rashad, who had told her he loved her, emptied the safe in her bedroom and disappeared in the middle of the night, taking not just cash but jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. A business manager named Clayton, whom her father had trusted, embezzled over $500,000 and fled to the Cayman Islands before anyone caught on. At first, Dorcas dismissed it all as bad luck, isolated incidents, the cost of living large. But the cracks kept spreading, faster and deeper than she could ignore. More friends revealed themselves as leeches. Marcus Jr., a guy she thought actually cared about her, recorded their intimate moments and tried to sell the footage to tabloids. Tiffany, her supposed best friend, was sleeping with every guy Dorcas dated, laughing about it in group chats that eventually got screenshotted and sent back to Dorcas. People started posting photos from her house online, mocking her, calling her desperate and pathetic and a spoiled little girl playing at being grown. The parties grew darker. People showed up who scared her, who brought drugs she didn't recognize, who started fights that turned violent. The mansion, once a symbol of freedom, became a place she felt unsafe in. She started sleeping with her bedroom door locked. She started jumping at sounds. She started drinking more and sleeping less and trusting absolutely no one. Her bank accounts, once seemingly infinite, began to show the damage. She had burned through millions on nothing, on people who didn't care, on experiences that meant nothing, on trying to fill a void that only grew bigger the more she threw into it. Her business managers sent increasingly urgent messages about cash flow problems, about investments that needed attention, about the importance of slowing down. She ignored them all. She looked in the mirror one morning after another sleepless night and didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Her eyes were hollow, ringed with dark circles. Her skin, once glowing, looked dull and tired. Her hair, usually perfect, was a mess. She had lost weight in an unhealthy way, all sharp angles and visible bones. Her soul felt empty, scraped clean of everything that had once made her feel alive. And for the first time, she felt genuinely afraid. Not of specific threats, but of the trajectory of her life. Of where this was all leading. Of the person she had become. She tried to call her mother. She picked up the phone a dozen times over the course of several weeks, her fingers hovering over the screen, her heart pounding. But she could never bring herself to press the button. What would she even say? How could she possibly explain? How could she admit that everything her mother had warned her about had come true? So she put the phone down, poured herself another drink, and told herself she didn't need anyone. That she was fine. That she just needed to be smarter about who she trusted. But the loneliness was suffocating. She would wake up in the middle of the night in that enormous mansion, surrounded by expensive things and crushing silence, and feel like she was drowning. She would walk through rooms filled with her father's achievements and feel his disappointment like a weight on her chest. She would remember her mother's face the day they took her away and feel something that might have been guilt if she let herself acknowledge it. She didn't let herself acknowledge it. Instead, she threw another party. Then came the night everything finally, completely fell apart. It was a Saturday in early February. Dorcas had thrown another party, bigger and louder than ever, desperate to feel something, anything, other than the gnawing void inside her. She had invited over 200 people, most of whom she didn't know. The mansion was packed, every room filled with bodies and noise and chaos. Around midnight, a fight broke out between two groups arguing over something stupid. It escalated quickly. Someone threw a punch. Someone else pulled out a knife. Dorcas tried to intervene, tried to break it up, but she was shoved aside. Then someone pulled out a gun. People started screaming. Someone fired a shot into the ceiling. The crowd panicked and stampeded toward the exits, breaking furniture, shattering windows, trampling anything in their path. Dorcas stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching her life literally explode around her. Someone called the police. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. The crowd scattered like roaches when the lights come on, running into the night, leaving Dorcas alone in the wreckage. The police came. Then the paramedics for the people who had been injured in the stampede. Then the fire department because someone had knocked over candles and started a small fire in the library. By the time everyone left, it was 4 a.m, and Dorcas was standing in what used to be her father's study, surrounded by destruction so complete it took her breath away. Every window was broken. The furniture was destroyed. The walls were stained and damaged. Her father's awards and photos were smashed on the floor. His books were torn and scattered. The portrait of her parents on their wedding day, the one that had hung above the fireplace for 30 years, had been ripped and thrown in the corner like garbage. Dorcas collapsed on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass and broken memories, and finally, let herself feel the full weight of what she had done. Not just tonight. Everything. Every choice. Every cruelty. Every moment she had chosen pride over love, excess over meaning, destruction over building. She had thrown away the one person who had ever truly loved her. The person who had sacrificed everything so she could have this life. And for what? For people who didn't care. For experiences that meant nothing. For a version of freedom that was really just another kind of prison. She sat there until the sun came up, crying until she had no tears left, understanding for the first time what her mother had been trying to tell her all along. That money without character was worthless. That wealth without wisdom was just noise. That she had been given everything and had turned it into nothing. It took her 3 days to gather the courage to go to the nursing home. 3 days of sitting in that destroyed mansion, looking at what her life had become, understanding that she had no one left. No real friends. No family. No one who actually cared whether she lived or died. She had achieved the ultimate freedom, the freedom of being completely, devastatingly alone. She didn't call ahead. She didn't prepare a speech. She just got in her car and drove, her hands shaking on the wheel, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She had no idea what she would say, no idea if her mother would even see her, no idea if forgiveness was possible or if she had destroyed that too. When she walked through the doors of Serenity Gardens, a receptionist asked if she needed help. Dorcas could barely speak. "I'm here to see Rose Laurent," she managed. The receptionist smiled. "Oh, Mrs. Laurent. She's out in the garden. She loves sitting out there in the afternoons." Dorcas followed the directions down a hallway, through a set of glass doors, and out into a beautifully maintained garden. And there, sitting on a bench in the sunlight, surrounded by flowers and warmth, was her mother. Rose looked different, profoundly different. Stronger, healthier, more vibrant than Dorcas had seen her in years. She had gained weight in a healthy way. Her skin glowed. Her hair was styled beautifully. She was wearing a pretty yellow dress and laughing at something Julia, sitting beside her, had just said. She looked happy, genuinely, deeply happy. And sitting there, watching her mother from a distance, Dorcas realized with crushing clarity that Rose had not just survived. She had thrived. She had healed. She had found joy and purpose and community. Without her daughter, despite her daughter, because she had been freed from the burden of loving someone who treated her like garbage. Dorcas stood frozen, watching, and felt the full weight of her own irrelevance. She had thought her mother needed her, would fall apart without her, would be lost and helpless and waiting for her to come back. But Rose had needed one thing Dorcas had never been able to give her: respect. And when that wasn't available, Rose had found it elsewhere. And then Rose looked up. Their eyes met across the garden. Rose's expression shifted from surprise to something Dorcas couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly. Not joy either. Something more complex. Something that looked like sadness mixed with strength. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Julia, noticing Rose's change in demeanor, followed her gaze and saw Dorcas. She squeezed Rose's hand gently, a silent question. Rose nodded slightly, and Julia stood, giving Rose's shoulder a supportive touch before walking back toward the building, leaving mother and daughter alone. Dorcas walked forward slowly, her legs trembling, tears already streaming down her face. She crossed the garden that felt like miles, until she was standing in front of her mother. And then, without thinking, without planning it, she fell to her knees on the grass beside Rose's bench. "I'm so sorry," Dorcas choked out, her voice breaking into pieces. "I'm so sorry. Mama, I was cruel. I was selfish. I was a monster to you. I treated you like you were nothing when you were everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to even be here. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see what I destroyed. And I hate myself for it. I hate who I became." Rose looked down at her daughter, kneeling in the grass, and for a moment her expression was unreadable. Then she reached out and placed a gentle hand on top of Dorcas' head, the same way she used to when Dorcas was a little girl having a nightmare. "I never stopped loving you," Rose said quietly, her voice steady but weighted with pain. "Not for a single day. But Dorcas, love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse and cruelty because you share blood. I had to let you go. I had to heal. I had to find myself again, separate from being your mother. And I did." Dorcas sobbed harder, her whole body shaking. "I ruined everything. Everything Dad built. Everything you sacrificed for. I turned it all into garbage. And I lost you. I lost the only person who ever really loved me." "You didn't lose me," Rose said, and there was something firm in her voice now, something that hadn't been there before. "You threw me away. There's a difference. You made a choice, Dorcas. You chose pride over family. You chose strangers over your mother. You chose to believe that money made you better than the people who loved you. Those were your choices." "I know," Dorcas whispered. I know, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to become someone worthy of you. Rose was quiet for a long moment, looking at her daughter with eyes that had seen too much pain but had somehow found peace anyway. You start, she said finally, by fixing yourself. Not for me, not to get me back, but because you deserve better than the life you've been living. You start by understanding that wealth is a tool, not an identity. That money can't fill the holes inside you. That the only way to be happy is to become someone you respect. Will you help me? Dorcas asked, her voice small and broken. Will you give me another chance? Rose took a deep breath. I'll be here. I'll talk to you. But Dorcas, I'm not coming back to live with you. I'm not going to be the mother I was before, sacrificing everything, accepting any treatment. I've built a life here. I have friends. I have Julia. I have peace. I love you, but I love myself too now. And I won't give that up again. The words hurt, but Dorcas understood they were necessary. Fair, even. She had broken something sacred, and it couldn't just be taped back together. I understand, she said. I just want to try. I want to be better. I want to be someone Dad would be proud of. Someone you could be proud of. Then do it, Rose said simply. Not by talking about it. By doing it. Show me with actions, not words. Rebuild your character the way your father built his business, piece by piece, with integrity, with sacrifice, with humility. And maybe, in time, we can build something new. Not what we had, but something real. Dorcas nodded, tears still streaming, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than emptiness. She felt possibility. Not redemption yet, not forgiveness, but the possibility that maybe, if she worked hard enough, suffered enough, changed enough, she might become someone worth knowing. Julia came back out then, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Rose and stood beside the bench, a quiet guardian. Dorcas looked up at her and understood immediately. This woman had become what Dorcas should have been. Julia had shown up when Dorcas had abandoned. Julia had loved when Dorcas had hated. Julia had earned the place beside Rose that Dorcas had thrown away. Thank you, Dorcas said to Julia, meaning it with everything she had. Thank you for being there for her when I wasn't. Julia nodded, her expression neutral but not unkind. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. I'm honored to know her. It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. Because it was true. Rose was extraordinary. And Dorcas, in her arrogance and blindness, had never seen it. The road back was not easy. It was painful and humbling and slower than Dorcas wanted it to be. She sold the mansion and everything in it, unable to live in the monument to her own destruction. She paid off her debts. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a normal neighborhood. She fired her remaining staff and learned to cook her own meals, clean her own space, live within her means. She attended therapy twice a week, working through the entitlement, the anger, the emptiness that had driven her to hurt the people who loved her. She volunteered at a homeless shelter, seeing for the first time what real poverty looked like, understanding how obscene her waste had been. She went back to school, pursuing a degree in social work, wanting to use her second chance to help people instead of just consuming. She visited her mother every week. At first, the conversations were awkward, painful, full of long silences and careful words. Rose was kind but boundaried, loving but not permissive. She didn't pretend Dorcas' apologies fixed everything. She didn't rush to restore what had been broken. She let Dorcas earn her way back, inch by inch, proving through consistent action that she had truly changed. It took 2 years before Rose hugged her daughter again. Really hugged her, with warmth and trust, not just the polite embrace of strangers. It took 3 years before they could laugh together without the shadow of the past looming over them. It took 5 years before Rose attended Dorcas' graduation from social work school, sitting in the audience with Julia beside her, both of them crying with pride as Dorcas walked across that stage. Rose never moved back in with Dorcas. She stayed at Serenity Gardens, in the community she had built, with the people who had loved her back to life. But she made space in her heart for Dorcas again, not as a savior or a provider, but as a daughter learning, slowly and painfully, what it meant to be a decent human being. Dorcas learned. She learned that pride was a thief that stole everything worth having. She learned that wealth without wisdom was just noise that eventually faded into silence. She learned that the people who sacrifice for you deserve more than your cruelty. They deserve your honor, your gratitude, your humility. She learned that money could buy comfort, but it couldn't buy character, and character was the only currency that mattered in the end. Years later, when Dorcas looked back on that time, she would say it was the worst and best thing that ever happened to her. The worst because of the pain she caused, the relationships she destroyed, the time she wasted. The best because it forced her to become someone worth knowing, someone with substance beneath the surface, someone who understood that the true measure of a person wasn't what they owned, but how they treated the people who couldn't benefit them. Her mother lived another 10 years, surrounded by love, laughter, dignity, and purpose. She painted hundreds of watercolors, wrote poetry, mentored younger residents, and built a life that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with meaning. And when she passed, peacefully in her sleep at 75, she did so knowing that her daughter had finally found her way. Dorcas stood at her mother's funeral, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the community of people who had loved Rose. Julia, the nurses from Serenity Gardens, the residents who had become her friends, the volunteers from the shelter where Rose had eventually started teaching art classes. There were more people there than Dorcas had expected, all of them with stories about how Rose had touched their lives, how she had shown them kindness, how she had made them feel seen. And Dorcas realized, standing there listening to strangers talk about her mother with such genuine love, that she had spent years living in a house full of people who meant nothing while her mother had built a community of people who meant everything. Rose had shown her, in the most powerful way possible, what true wealth looked like. It wasn't in bank accounts or mansions or designer labels. It was in the faces of people who cried real tears when you were gone. It was in relationships built on respect and reciprocity. It was in a life lived with purpose beyond yourself. When it was Dorcas' turn to speak, she stood at the podium and looked out at all those faces. She didn't try to pretend she had been the perfect daughter. She didn't try to rewrite history or make herself look better than she had been. She simply told the truth. My mother was an extraordinary woman, Dorcas began, her voice shaking but steady. And for a long time, I was too blind, too arrogant, and too cruel to see it. I treated her like she was a burden when she was a blessing. I spoke to her with contempt when she deserved honor. I threw her away when she needed me most, all because I thought money made me better than the woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a life she never had. She paused, looking down at her hands, then back up at the crowd. My mother could have given up on me. She could have written me off as a lost cause, as someone not worth loving anymore. But she didn't. She held space for me to grow, to change, to become someone worthy of her love. She didn't make it easy. She shouldn't have made it easy, but she never closed the door completely. She showed me that love isn't about accepting abuse. It's about having boundaries while still believing someone can be better. And because of her, I am better. Not perfect, not even close, but better than I was. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued. She taught me, in the last years of her life, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you lift up, the legacy of kindness you leave behind. Look around this room. Look at all of you. This is my mother's real fortune. Not the money my father left, but the love she gave. And I hope, for the rest of my life, I can honor her by trying to do the same. She stepped down from the podium and walked to the casket, placing her hand on the smooth wood. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "Thank you for everything. For never giving up on me. For showing me what strength really looks like. for loving me even when I didn't deserve it. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you proud." After the funeral, Julia approached Dorcas. They had developed a cautious friendship over the years, built on mutual respect and their shared love for Rose. Julia pulled Dorcas into a tight embrace. "She was proud of you," Julia said softly. "Near the end, she told me that watching you change was one of the greatest joys of her life. She said you gave her hope that people could really transform if they wanted to badly enough." Dorcas broke down completely, sobbing into Julia's shoulder. "I wasted so much time. If I could go back." "But you can't," Julia interrupted gently. "None of us can. All we can do is be better going forward. Your mother understood that. She lived that. And now it's your job to carry it forward." And Dorcas did. She carried it forward in everything she did. She worked at the homeless shelter full-time, using her social work degree to help people rebuild their lives after addiction, poverty, and trauma. She created a foundation in her mother's name, funding programs that provided support for elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. She lived simply, modestly, keeping only enough money to live comfortably and giving the rest away to causes that actually mattered. She never forgot the lessons she had learned the hard way. She never forgot what it felt like to be broken, humbled, forced to confront the ugliness of who she had been. And she never, ever took for granted the people who showed up in her life with genuine care. 10 years after her mother's death, Dorcas was invited to speak at a conference about family relationships and the crisis of elder abuse. She stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, and told her story without shame or pretense. She told them about her arrogance, her cruelty, her fall from grace. She told them about her mother's dignity, her strength, her refusal to be destroyed by her daughter's toxicity. She told them about Julia, about Serenity Gardens, about the long, painful journey of rebuilding herself into someone with actual character. "Pride," she said, her voice carrying through the auditorium, "is the most expensive thing I ever owned. It cost me relationships, time, peace, and nearly cost me my soul. I thought money made me untouchable. I thought wealth meant I could treat people however I wanted. I thought my mother's love was something I could abuse without consequences. I was wrong about everything." She paused, letting the words sink in. If you have parents who sacrificed for you, who loved you, who gave up pieces of themselves so you could thrive, honor them while they're still here. Don't wait until they're gone to realize what you had. Don't wait until you've destroyed the relationship to understand its value. Your parents aren't perfect. No one is. But if they tried, if they loved you the best way they knew how, if they gave you opportunities they never had, give them the respect they deserve. Because one day, they'll be gone, and you'll be left with either gratitude or regret. The choice is yours. The audience was silent, many of them crying, many of them thinking about their own parents, their own relationships, their own choices. Dorcas stepped down from the stage and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was doing what she was meant to do. Not consuming, but contributing. Not taking, but giving. Not destroying, but building. That night, alone in her small apartment, Dorcas looked at the only photo she had kept from the mansion, a picture of her, her mother, and her father from when she was 6 years old. They were at the beach, all of them laughing, covered in sand, happy in a way that had nothing to do with money. She traced her mother's face with her finger and smiled through her tears. "I hope I'm making you proud, Mama," she whispered to the photograph. "I hope wherever you are, you can see that I finally understand, that I finally get it, that your sacrifice wasn't wasted, even though I tried so hard to waste it. I'm living differently now. I'm loving differently. I'm being the person you always believed I could be." She set the photo down and looked out her window at the city lights, thinking about the speech she had given, about the people in that audience who might go home and call their parents, might apologize for things left unsaid, might choose gratitude over pride. And she understood that this was her mother's real legacy. Not the money, not the mansion, but the lessons learned through pain and transformed into purpose. Pride, Dorcas had learned, was a thief that promised everything and delivered nothing. It whispered that you were better than everyone else, that you deserved more, that other people's feelings didn't matter. It convinced you that love was weakness and humility was foolishness. It built walls so high you couldn't see the people who actually cared about you. And then, when everything collapsed and you were left alone in the rubble, pride disappeared, leaving you with nothing but regret and the devastating clarity of seeing what you had destroyed. But there was also grace in that clarity. There was possibility in that rock bottom. Because once you had nothing left to prove and no one left to impress, you could finally start building something real, something that would last, something that mattered. Dorcas learned that the hard way. She learned it through loss, through humiliation, through the slow, painful process of looking in the mirror and admitting who she had become. She learned it through her mother's quiet dignity, through Julia's unexpected kindness, through the community of people who showed her what love actually looked like when it wasn't transactional. And now, every day, she tried to pass that lesson forward. To the people she worked with at the shelter, to the young people who came to her foundation looking for help, to the audiences she spoke to, hoping that maybe one person would hear her story and make a different choice. That maybe one person would call their mother and say thank you before it was too late. That maybe one person would choose humility over pride, character over comfort, relationships over reputation. Because in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not how much money you had, or how many people knew your name, or how perfect your life looked from the outside. What mattered was whether you loved well, whether you treated people with dignity, whether you left the world better than you found it. What mattered was whether, at the end of your life, people cried real tears because you were gone, not because of what you owned, but because of who you were. Rose Lauren had lived that truth. And Dorcas, her broken, humbled, transformed daughter, would spend the rest of her life trying to do the same. If you've made it this far, let me ask you something. Who in your life has sacrificed for you? Who stood by you when you had nothing to offer them? Who loved you before you were successful, before you were impressive, before you had anything to prove? And more importantly, how are you treating them right now, today, in this moment? Are you taking them for granted? Are you too busy, too important, too caught up in your own life to show them you care? Are you treating their love like it's infinite, like it will always be there no matter how badly you behave? Are you speaking to them with respect or with contempt? Are you making time for them or making excuses? Because here's the truth that Dorcas learned too late. Time is not infinite. Your parents, your family, the people who loved you into existence, they won't be here forever. And when they're gone, you'll be left with one of two things. Either a heart full of gratitude for the time you shared and the love you gave back, or a soul full of regret for the words you never said and the respect you never showed. Don't wait until they're in a nursing home to realize their value. Don't wait until they're sick to show them you care. Don't wait until you're standing at their funeral, surrounded by strangers who knew them better than you did, to understand what you lost. Honor them now. Love them now. Show them, through your actions and your words, that their sacrifice meant something, that their love mattered, that you see them, you value them, and you're grateful. Pride will tell you that you don't owe anyone anything, that you're self-made, independent, above the need for gratitude or humility. Pride will whisper that your parents are old-fashioned, that they don't understand you, that their advice is irrelevant. Pride will convince you that you have all the time in the world to fix things later, to apologize eventually, to show appreciation someday. Pride is a liar. The price of pride is everything worth having. It's relationships destroyed, time wasted, love rejected, and the crushing weight of regret that follows you for the rest of your life. It's standing in an empty mansion surrounded by expensive things that mean nothing, realizing too late that you traded the only people who actually loved you for temporary validation from strangers who never cared. Dorcas paid that price. She paid it in full. And though she found her way back, though she rebuilt herself into someone with character and purpose, she could never get back the years she wasted. She could never undo the pain she caused. She could never sit with her mother one more time and just say thank you. But you can. If your parents are still alive, if you still have the chance, you can choose differently. You can call them today. You can apologize for the harsh words, the disrespect, the taking them for granted. You can tell them you see their sacrifice, you appreciate their love, you recognize everything they gave up for you. You can choose humility over pride, gratitude over arrogance, relationship over reputation. And if you do, if you make that choice right now, today, you'll save yourself from the kind of regret that Dorcas carried for the rest of her life. You'll build something worth more than all the money in the world. You'll have a relationship built on respect, a connection built on gratitude, and a legacy built on love. The choice is yours. The time is now. Don't wait. Because pride always costs more than you can afford to pay. And by the time you realize it, everything worth having is already gone.